My name is Sandra Lowry. I'm the Director of Learning Support Services, and it is an honor to be amongst so many beautiful people. Thank you so much. Well, today you are in for a treat. I have the honor of introducing our fearless leader this morning. I'd like to bring forward the leader of our district. It's been such an honor and a pleasure to get to know him over the last few years. Mr. Christopher Hoffman, our superintendent.
Not often you have to adjust the mic, but after Sandra, she's definitely taller than me. All right, welcome everybody. I couldn't be more excited to have this second annual Power of One conference. The energy that's in the room, you can feel it. And we have our guests that are here, and one of the first questions that was asked was, how do you get this many people here on a Saturday? And I go, we're just Elk Grove Unified. It's just what we do. So thank you. I was with a group of superintendents yesterday from all over Northern California with a group that I get to meet with 3 or 4 times a year. And I love meeting with them because no one truly understands what it's like to be a superintendent except other superintendents. So that part's kind of nice. The interesting part is always listening to the relationships that they have with their employees, the relationships they have with their communities, and the challenges that they're dealing with those relationships. And then I just come back here and I hang out with you folks, and I feel really, really good about that. So thank you for being here, and thank you for being part of our family. So one thing I want to do, and make sure I do not forget to do this, is Ms. Sandra Lowry, please stand up. So Sandra's going to follow me, and she's going to give a whole bunch of thank yous to a whole bunch of people who've done a lot of work to make this happen. But it's her leadership, and actually her vision, is the reason that this actually was pulled off. And so I just want to make sure we give her just due, and I just want to personally thank you for all your work and your leadership. You know, we have other leaders in this district that help make this work happen as well. And one of them is a gentleman who serves on our board of trustees who I've known, I think, since I was in 8th grade because his daughter and I went to school together, Mr. Chet Madison. Chet's seen the district through really, really challenging times and really, really great times, and his leadership makes a huge difference, so thank you very much. And then my cabinet team. We couldn't do this work without having a quality group of people that help support me in the day-to-day operations in meeting the needs of our schools. And so a couple of them I want to introduce. First one is Mr. Mark Cerruti, Deputy Superintendent. The always fabulous Ms. Donna Cherry, Associate Superintendent, Pre-K 6. I see Ms. Zonthi Pinkerton, Director of Communications. If you talk about someone that's made a difference, if you go to our social media and the contacts that we have within our communities now, it just didn't exist, and now it does, and her efforts have made a huge difference, so thank you. And then we have our brand new cabinet member, and she's down here on the side because she's still getting used to hanging out with us, so she's kind of over on the side over here. Ms. Sue Larson. And Sue's the new Executive Director of Education Services, and we couldn't be more proud to have her in the new role, so welcome. So I'm going to be brief. You know me. They give me 15 minutes, and I try to get it done in 7. That's my goal, and we'll see. But I'm usually pretty good at hitting those goals. But I do want to talk about 3 things, and 2 of them you've heard me talk about before, and one of them you've seen in some of the writings that I've shared, and with some of the leaders you've actually seen me engage in this work. But the first thing we talk about is we're here about improving the performance of kids, each kid every day. And the only way I know how to do that is if we, the adults, get better at what we do, because the kids are already performing to the level we're able to take them. So you being here today is just further evidence of your commitment to making sure you improve as an educator and as a person, and that just gives me so much hope that our kids are going to improve as well. So again, thank you very much for being here. The second thing I'd like to talk about is connections and connecting kids to school. I firmly believe a connected kid is a successful kid. And I have two boys that have gone K-12. They're both off at college now, and couldn't be more different. Two completely different kids. From the day my second one was born, I told my wife, Judy, yeah, Jacob's completely different. She goes, you can't know that yet. I'm just telling you, he's completely different. And about 3 weeks later, she goes, okay, you're right, he's completely different. But both of them connected to our schools in very different ways. One, the athlete, more traditional, and the other one ended up being an officer in the Future Business Leaders of America. And that served him and his connections very, very well. As a coach over the years, as a principal, as a teacher, seeing kids connect to school makes all the difference. The relationships that you develop with kids make all the difference. You seeing the greatness in every single kid you come across on a daily basis, because they all have it. Some of them try to hide it a little more than others, but I'm telling you, they all have it. And if you take the time to find it, it will make a huge difference in their lives, and it'll make a huge difference in your lives as well. The last one I want to talk about is something that I've been working with really the last 2 years with regards, and it's been with the leadership team. I started with cabinet, and then we went to our Partners in Education group, which you know is the 2 leaders from each of our 5 unions and our administrator group, as well as a board member. And when I share that story across the state, that we actually have a group called Partners in Education, and we have leaders from 5 different unions and our administrators around the table talking about improving what we're providing to kids, people are amazed. And so the work we've been doing the last couple of years is based on a book called Leadership and Self-Deception. And I've shared a little bit about it in some of the writings, and we're going to spend some more time with it district-wide as we move forward. But the idea is about mindset. And you can bring an inward mindset to a situation, or you can bring an outward mindset to a situation. And an outward mindset means you are open to the humanity of another person. You know their hopes, you know their dreams, you know their goals, and you align your work to help all of those come true. And I can say from personal experiences, as a father, as a husband, and as a leader, it's made a dramatic impact on the work that I do and the relationships I have in my home and in my world of work. And I've seen it transform relationships within the district already. So I couldn't be more excited about sharing the work. We just had a brainstorming session with the Partners in Education group, and we're putting together a couple of Saturday seminars that we're going to put together this year. And we're going to invite all of you to have an opportunity to be one of the first groups from the school site level to be involved in the work. So couldn't be more excited about it. In the end, I just get the opportunity to brag once more that the Elko family has come together to improve as individuals, to improve as an organization in the service of kids. You're going to hear a lot of phenomenal information today. You're going to hear some stories that will touch you and will help remind us of why we're here doing the work. Each kid every day, doing everything we can to connect them to our schools and finding the greatness in every single kid we work with. So thank you. I'm going to get on with the rest of the day so you guys can have a great conference. So thank you very much.
So I'm back before you once again, and I am tasked on the program to give what we call the Title I address, and it is a call to action. As leaders in our Title I schools, this call to action is really about the why, the how, and the what of our work. And our call to action is grounded in our firm belief that education is a civil right. Although we have had significant improvements and many successes across our country, state, city, school district, schools, and in our classrooms, our challenge today is to quicken the rate and pace of change. Not only must we not lose another generation, we must not lose a single child to the continuing legacy of past oppression and the unfairness of ongoing inequality. Our work as educators in Title I schools is to ensure equity by giving students what they need when they need it. Our passion and efforts should yield the outcomes, as Chris shared earlier, about every student in every classroom in every subject every day, one moment at a time, measurably learning on the path of being college, career, and life ready. So when we speak about the why of our work, it lends itself to our core belief and the knowledge that some of our students lack opportunity and access to realize their greatest potential. The achievement gap is persistent. Our students need us. That's our why. How? What are the actions we need to take? I would say to you that we need to be courageous and allow our passions to be contagious, because this is how we will attain cultural relevance that's really needed in the work. Love your work, students, families, colleagues, and yourself, because investing in relationships is crucial to our work. I would also challenge you to not settle. Don't settle. Raise the bar each day. Perfect your craft. We must focus on effective teaching and learning. As the superintendent shares often, when the adults in our system get better, we can do amazing things for kids. So sustaining rigor has to be a daily commitment. So when we think about the what, it lends itself to the results that we're after. We are calling on you, as one of the key ideas here in our Power of One, to be the one to make the difference. We're also counting on you to do the hard work each day to move from awareness to advocacy to action. We must use the tenets of E4 to safeguard equity, to achieve and to ensure student success. And I'd like to just, as we think about ourselves being leaders that are leading the front office in our schools, or leading in our after-school programs, or as principals leading our entire school communities. As teachers, you may be leading departments, but all of us are leading our students. All of us are leading our students. And so I have this quote from Simon Sinek that I heard a while ago, and it really resonates with me. And it says, leadership is not about being in charge. Leadership is taking care of those in your charge. Let's be mindful of that today as we learn, as we invest in ourselves to be better leaders so that we can do amazing things for kids. Thank you. I also have the privilege to introduce our guest speaker. If you haven't had the opportunity and honor to be in the presence of Dr. Pedro Noguera, you are in for an amazing treat. The how we will achieve equity, it will only happen with excellence. And Dr. Noguera has been leading that work. Welcome and thank you.
Good morning. It is such a pleasure to be in Elk Grove, and I want to thank the superintendent and thank the district for inviting me. I want to start, and I think it's always helpful to start by thinking about the big issues and then situate our work within the big issue. 'Cause sometimes when you're in education, you can get so fixated on the work you do immediately, whether it be at the classroom level or your particular job, that sometimes we lose sight of the bigger picture, what this is all about. So historically, what this has always been about is about using education to expand opportunity. The idea coming from Horace Mann, one of the first architects of public education in this country, was that education should be the great equalizer. It would be the means through which we ensure that the children of all kinds could use education to improve their lives, and that America would not become a society where your background and who your parents were determined what you could accomplish. So education's always been a part of the American dream. And as we know, if you trace the history of American education, you can actually trace the evolution of American democracy. Because who was intended to benefit from that dream has expanded. Initially, it wasn't all people or all children. It wasn't all races, all religions. It took education to expand access for women, for African Americans. It took education because each time we educate a group, we decide that their other rights have to be acknowledged too. So for the disabled, for those who don't speak English as a first language, we make the change in education, and then we say, guess what? We need to let them vote too. Right? And we need to enfranchise them as citizens. And so although there's no guarantee to an education in the Constitution, it's not mentioned. Every state now acknowledges the right to an education. The South was the last. Took Reconstruction to bring education to the South. Right? But now every child, including the undocumented, have the right to an education in this country. That's what the courts have said. So what we know is that although we have a right, we don't get equality. That we are also one of the few countries, despite this history of using education as a means to ensure that all people can participate, we don't give equal access. So we're one of few countries, few industrialized countries in the world that intentionally spends more money on wealthy children than poor children. Canadians don't do that. If you go to Toronto, and I like to point to Toronto, because Toronto is the highest performing urban district in North America. If you go to a poor community, because they still have poverty in Canada, though I would also add, poverty doesn't look, in Canada doesn't look anything like poverty in America. They don't have ghettos in Canada, for example. Right? You go to Windsor, Ontario, right across from Detroit. Windsor is a thriving black community across from Detroit, right? One of the poorest communities in this country. Well, in Toronto, when you go to a school, you can't tell that because it's serving poor kids that it's a poor school. Because they got great facilities, they got great teachers, they got great resources. Poverty doesn't mean it's a signal of low quality, because they have consistency in standards. And in fact, if a school's not performing well, the Ministry of Education sends in experts who come in and ask, how can we help? They use threats and pressure to get improvement. Michael Fullen, a colleague who's written a lot about this, Michael Fullen's an expert on education and has written recently about California education, said that what sets Toronto apart from many cities in the United States is they use different drivers for reform. Right? In Toronto and Canada, it's been capacity building as a driver. They actually help people get better, because here's the key. If the skills of the staff match the needs of the kids, you know what happens? The kids' needs get served, and kids' performance goes up. Right? When there's a mismatch, it doesn't work out too well. And the capacity building driver in Toronto has led for 17 years of gains in every category for every group of kids, immigrant kids, poor kids, across the board. That's why they're number 2 in the world in science and math. We are number 17 and dropping steadily. Because unlike Canada and unlike most of the other countries ahead of us, we don't provide universal access to preschool. And all the research says the learning that occurs at infancy sets the foundation for the learning that occurs in life. Is that a shock? No, what's shocking is that we don't do it. I start there because although equity has been right in the heart of American education from the very beginning, equity in practice hasn't been. Right? There's been a contradiction between what we say we believe and what we actually do. And so today, I'm going to use my time to disturb you, to push you, to make you uncomfortable with what you do. Because I think it's very easy for terms like equity become just yet another slogan. And we know that in American education, we've had lots of slogans, haven't we? No Child Left Behind, that was a great one. That was a great slogan. Except where did it come from? It came from not the Bush administration, it came from the Children's Defense Fund. And when Marian Wright Edelman came up with the slogan, "Leave no child behind," it didn't mean test the kids as frequently as possible. She had something else in mind, like health, nutrition, a holistic view of children and child development. That was what she was calling for. It came to mean something else when it became education policy. Every student succeeds, yet another great slogan. What does it really mean to ensure that every child has a chance to succeed? Title I. Title I, where did it come from? It came from the initial Elementary Education Secondary Act, approved by Lyndon B. Johnson as a part of the War on Poverty. It was a civil rights initiative. That's the origin. And what's particularly important about that is Lyndon Johnson had been a teacher. He taught on the border in Texas. He taught poor Latino kids. And up front, he saw what happens when you don't acknowledge and address poverty. Because poverty is an educational issue. Not because poor kids can't learn, because there's absolutely no evidence that poverty is a learning disability. But when kids are hungry, and when kids don't have a stable home, and basic needs aren't being met, you can't expect to see those kids do as well as the kids who have everything. And so Title I was seen as a compensatory measure. That was the language that was used, to compensate for the effects of poverty. Now, Michael Fullen just wrote another article I encourage you to read. Came out this week. It's a warning about LCAP funding for California. As we know now, we have a state that's taken a step forward. I want to applaud Jerry Brown, who actually was governor when I first came to California. It seems like he never goes away, but he's done something really important with LCAP funding, which is the idea that we're actually going to give more money to districts and schools that need more. Wow, sounds like what we should have been doing, but we're finally doing it in California. Here's Michael Fullen's warning. I'll issue the same warning. Many schools don't know what to do with the extra money because they haven't had an equity lens. And so I'm going to speak about equity in a way that I think hopefully won't make you feel too uncomfortable, but hopefully will serve as a reminder of what's most important. And so I want to start by giving a definition. Definition that recognizes that the academic needs of a child and their non-academic needs, the social, the emotional, are interrelated. Right? Which means as soon as we say we have an equity lens, then we say, guess what, we can't just focus on academics. We're going to have to focus on all the other things like health and nutrition, like emotions and their psychological well-being, because they're all happening in the same person. How many of you have trouble concentrating when you're stressed out or if you're sick? How many of our kids have trouble reading because they need eyeglasses? How many of us acknowledge that homework is an equity issue? How many of you help your own kids with homework? Not many people helping their kids with homework, I see. Many people I ask, they help their kids with their homework. Even when they're tired. Even when they don't understand it themselves, they're doing it. And how many of you have students right now who have no one to help them with homework? May not even have a stable place to get the homework done. How do we take that into account when we assign homework? You know, there are a lot of teachers out here who confuse rigor with how many hours of homework they've assigned. Right? And there are a lot of teachers who get no training at all on how to even assign homework. Right? Homework that is new work is usually an exercise in frustration for kids if there's no one there to help them with it. So when we have an equity lens, we start to see everything. We start to see the child who needs to get the eyes examined, or the child who has an abscess and might need to see a dentist, or the child who didn't get enough sleep for whatever reason, is tired. If sleeping, you ever see kids like that, sleeping? Right? We see the whole child. Now, I often point out to people that if we think about this the way we think about our own children, how many of you have more than one child at home? All right. You're practicing equity. I practice equity because when you have more than one child, you practice equity at home. I have 5. So I'm an expert on equity. Right? And they go from age 34 to 5. So I've been at this for a long time. When you focus on equity with your own children, you're always focused on outcomes. Right? But the outcomes are varied. I'm not just concerned about my kids' grades, although I am. I'm concerned about character. I want them to be good people. I'm concerned about temperament. I want them to be people who can handle stress and don't give up. I'm concerned about them being honest people. I'm concerned about them being happy. I'm concerned about them being independent so they don't live with me forever. I'm concerned about that too. Okay? So when we have an equity lens, we see the whole child, just as we want others to see our children as the complex individuals they are. So this image, hopefully, is a good reminder of what equity is not. Can't be about treating everyone the same, because we know very well they're not the same. But equity is about making the standards accessible. Some kids will need more time, will need more support. We don't lower the bar, we simply make the bar accessible. Right? So what does it look like in your schools? Well, again, if you use the image of a family, this is mine, I've got a few extras in there. That guy with the big hat and black, that's my oldest son. He's bigger than me, so he eats more than me. So when we order, it's okay, eat as much as you want. The guy next to him with that gray sweatshirt is vegan. No meat, no dairy. Now he's gluten-free too. It's really getting hard to feed him. Right? And the little one up front, she doesn't like food at all. Seriously, you have to chase her to get her to eat anything. The goal is not to eat the same. Eating the same would be fruitless, and it wouldn't meet the need. The goal is to make sure everybody gets what they need when we eat. Well, use that as a metaphor now to think about your schools. We have goals for our kids. We want them to be successful. We want them to be independent. We hopefully want them to become good citizens, good lifelong learners, people who will be able to support themselves and their families. The path to get there is going to look different for different kids. That's why equity work is so complex. But again, if anybody with more than one child already knows that, right? Because all your kids are different, aren't they? Even identical twins are different. One parent told me that she has identical twin boys. She said they're totally different. The first one, his word was snuggle. The other one's first word was jump. Tell you all the differences in their personalities. But again, when we look at the kids in our schools, the way we would want our children to be seen, it forces us and compels us to treat them differently, to see the whole person. So equity can't be about lowering the standards, can't be about making excuses because of poverty, although it is about trying to compensate for the effects of poverty. It's not just an issue for schools serving poor kids or kids of color. So I'm a little concerned that your non-Title I schools, are they here today? Are they here today? I see a couple hands. Okay, maybe they are, I can't tell from the show of hands. I'm concerned because I don't want it to be that equity is just their issue, not our issue. We don't have to focus on equity. I work with a district in Colorado, Cherry Creek, one of the largest districts in the state right outside of Denver. They had a chief equity officer who resigned. Superintendent asked me, what should we do? And I was trying to give him some suggestions, and we talked for a while. Then a week later, I contacted him and said, what did you decide to do? He said, I decided I will be the chief equity officer. Because the only way we will take equity seriously is if people realize that it starts at the top, and it filters everything we do in the whole system. Now, Cherry Creek is an affluent suburb known for serving some of the wealthiest people in Colorado, but they're experiencing demographic change like Elk Grove. And as they do, some of the teachers who were really good with affluent white kids turn out to be not so good with kids of color. And if you have teachers, anybody know teachers like that? And they're like waiting for demographics to change again. I wish those other kids would come back. You know, we can't be a district that's only good for kids who don't need much help. If I tell you there's a good doctor, but only if you're not sick, you probably say, I don't want that one, right? Give me the one who's good with the sick people, right? Because the way we judge our doctors and hospitals is how much value do they add? How much do they help us get better? And that's the way we got to judge our schools. Do they help the kids get more confident, more competent? Do they help them to become independently motivated learners? Equity work can't just be about what some schools do. It's got to be what all of us do. And so we don't have time for a discussion, but I want you to think about the equity challenges at your schools. You know, sometimes they show up in discipline. Because in most schools, we are most likely to punish the kids with the greatest needs. And in many cases, we punish them because of those needs. How many of you seen kids act out at reading time because they can't read and they're embarrassed? How many times have you seen kids act out because they're neglected at home? One of the things we know is you respond to the behavior, but you don't address the cause, the behavior doesn't go away. It may actually get worse. So what are the primary equity issues in your school? Here's a common one: teacher assignments. Who's teaching whom? You know, one of the crazy things about American education is we almost intentionally assign the least experienced, least effective teachers to teach the neediest kids. Now, if you're one of those teachers and you say, wait a second, is that why they sent me these kids? I don't mean to offend you here. But we don't do that with electricians. We don't do that with doctors. We don't do that with lawyers. We don't do that in almost any other field. We say the complex, difficult cases, we say that for the experts, not the rookies. Education, we don't do it like that. So here's an example of equity in action. Fontana High School, down in Southern California, 4,000 kids, all low income, all Hispanic, highest advanced placement calculus scores in the county. I asked the superintendent, how do you get such high AP calculus scores? She said, because we have an excellent calculus teacher. And I convinced her to start teaching 2 sections of 9th grade math. I said, why? She said, because until I did, we only had 6 or 7 kids in calculus every year. You know what happens when you get your best math teacher to start taking on the 9th grade? You build the road to calculus. And you send a message to the entire math department: we're not going to run away from the 9th grade. We're going to share that responsibility. Equity shows up in decisions like that. Equity shows up in conversations you have with your colleagues. And a lot of people are afraid of this work because sometimes we have to be able to confront our colleagues when we see unfairness. Because some kids are being denied the opportunity to learn. I was explaining this when I was asked to speak to a group of principals in a district in New Jersey. A district which, on the face of it, should be excellent because they have high per pupil spending, a lot of support for public education, a very liberal community, but it has those very distinct disparities in achievement that correspond to race and class. And so I explained, I said, a lot of this achievement gap is perpetuated by opportunity gaps. And what we need is educators who address those opportunity gaps, who speak out. And principal raised his hand and said, I've seen an example of what you described. I said, well, why don't you share it with the group? He said, well, I'm new here. And I'm the principal at the high school, and I notice it's a group of boys, African-American boys, who linger in the hallways after the bell rings. And so I decided I was going to put a stop to it because I knew I didn't want that happening anymore, so I was going to escort them to class, and as I did, I noticed they were all headed to the basement. And that's when I found out that the special ed classes were being held in the basement. And that's when they explained there was nothing going on there anyway. The kids were playing cards, nothing was happening. And one of the kids said, "I don't like the fact that all the dumb kids are in the basement." So in front of the whole group, he says, "I think it's time to get these kids out of the basement." And some people looked away, and there was silence in the room, because those kids had been in the basement for years. But no one had ever said, "You know what, this is a problem." That when we stigmatize kids in this way, it actually reinforces the very behavior we say we're trying to address, because we've denied them learning opportunities. So my question to you in Elk Grove is, who's in your basement? And maybe you don't have a basement. Maybe you have a bungalow. Maybe you have a classroom down the hall where you know very well if the kids get that classroom, they're not going to go make any progress this year. Because we know, look at the track record. No one's ever made progress in that class. If we're not willing to call it out, if we're not willing to push for what my colleague Richard Elmore at Harvard calls internal accountability, because internal accountability is ultimately more important than external accountability. How do we treat each other? How do we talk to each other about the work? Internal accountability will drive improvement. And so I want to encourage you to be willing to raise the difficult issues. And as we do, it forces us then to talk about what are the conditions that we need to have in place for good teaching and learning in our schools. Now, how many gardeners are out there in the audience today? Any gardeners? A few gardeners. I'm a gardener. I'm a rookie gardener, but I'm a gardener nonetheless. I'm very proud of my garden. Usually the first thing I show it, because we don't have much land, so we use the front yard as my garden. Right? And I've got peppers, I've got tomatoes, I've got watermelon, very proud. Only 3 came, but I was very happy with my watermelon. Onions, potatoes. Eggplant did not grow. And so I was thinking maybe it was something wrong with the eggplant seeds that I'd gotten, until I saw my neighbor's eggplants, which were fine. And then I realized it wasn't the eggplant's fault. It was my fault. Because I know enough as a gardener to know that if you get the conditions right, things should grow. This is California. We grow stuff here, right? What are the conditions? Well, there's fertilizer. I got organic fertilizer. Okay, you got to have enough water, which is an issue in LA, but we got water now, right? Sunlight, plenty of sun. Right? If you get the conditions right, the vegetables should grow. What are the essential conditions that must be in place for kids to learn? Now, I frame it that way because I think too often in our schools, it's like blaming the eggplants. We blame the kids. When the kids aren't achieving, we say, well, this one has a bad attitude. It's their behavior. Or their parents. How many of you ever heard people blame the parents of the kids for why the kids aren't learning? That's about as effective as blaming the eggplants. And it doesn't mean that the parents aren't a factor. I'll come back to that in a moment, because parents are a factor. But when we spend our time focusing on the things we don't control, we completely overlook all the things we do control. So what are some of the essential ingredients in schools? There's got to be safety and order. No one can learn in an unsafe environment, and safety is not just about physical safety, it's about emotional and psychological safety. No bullying, no harassment, or our classrooms, a place where it's safe to make mistakes. And safety is a byproduct of relationships. Right? Do you feel like the adults around you are going to care for you, look out for you, have your back, that your peers will support you? It's about respect. It's about clarity of purpose. It's about support for effective teaching, which means that we can't allow teachers to work in isolation. Biggest obstacle to improving teaching is the isolation of our teachers. In so many schools, we have excellent teachers right next door to people who are struggling. How do you give that person who's struggling a chance to see what excellent teaching looks like? And then to learn from that person. And then finally, it's about morale. I have never been to a high-performing school or district with low morale. Never seen one. Where people are running out the door at the end of the day faster than the kids. You ever see a school that's like that, that's succeeding? Morale matters. You ever hear the saying, feed the teachers or they'll eat the children? Abuse can trickle down in a system. And so I'm going to come back to that because that's all about school culture. Ultimately, it's also about getting the kids to be part of the educational process too. What's your strategy for getting kids to care about education, to care about learning, to try their hardest? What's your strategy to get them motivated? How often at the end of the day, the kids come to say, wow, what a day we had. That was excellent. Can't wait to come back tomorrow. How often does that happen? Where kids are saying that they were really inspired by what they learned. I was at a school in Central Valley, in San Fernando Valley. I asked that question to a group of high school kids. One girl said, every day that happens here. I said, every day? I find that hard to believe. I said, what did you learn yesterday? She said, yesterday, we learned about the forced sterilization of women that occurred in this country in the 1930s. I was so disturbed. I went home and told my father about it. We talked about it for 2 hours. I came back wanting to read more. And she explained that happens at this school all the time. And I asked the teachers, that kind of work happening? She said, yes, because we work together. We plan together. We are a community. And despite the fact they have high poverty, despite the fact that they are surrounded by different competing gangs, not only is their school safe, it is high achieving. So I'm going to describe more schools like that because when you start to peel back the layers and look at where we, in fact, are getting excellence through equity, you start to see, whoa, they're doing things differently. And, you know, in most fields, we learn from success. We do that in football, right? Everybody likes to learn from the Patriots. They want to recruit somebody from the Patriots. They lost this week, but, you know, they think they'll come back eventually again, right? Raiders would like somebody from there, right? But in education, we don't do the same thing. You know, we don't take the time to learn from success. And I would say if we did, it would make our work a lot easier. So I mentioned already capacity building as being a key. Capacity building has to start at the central office. How many central office folks are here today? I know there's a lot. They think they're staying together up here, right? There's some way back there. They're gathered back there too. So my question to you, if you're from the central office, when you show up at a school, are they happy to see you? Do they see you as help? Are they willing to say, hey, we're struggling with this. Can you come and give us some input on how to approach this? Or do they think that you're there to judge, to scrutinize, to pressure, to threaten? Right? Because what we need to get this work done is collaborative problem solving. Right? The issues we face in our schools are complex. They're not easy. Question is, how do we work together to address that complexity? And do we see each other as a source of support? We have good research about how to do equity work. It starts with child development, and what we know from child development is that you've got to address the whole child, right? Because the social, the emotional, the physical, they're all interrelated. Abraham Maslow was right. There is a hierarchy of human needs, and those basic needs have to be met for children to experience healthy human development. There's also good research in neuroscience telling us that the brain is like a muscle. It has to be worked. All children have to be stimulated. All children have to be challenged. Good education should be like good food, makes you want more. And third, we have to understand the context. Have to understand what's going on outside of school, what's happening in the family, what's going on in the home, because kids don't live with us, they live in communities. And the more we know about the children we serve, the more we'll know about how to serve them. So there's good work out there about how to create a framework that allows us to do this work well. And some schools, as I said, are doing that. Others are allowing what I call the common obstacles to get in the way. Some of those are politics. Right? politics of inequity, right? The politics of race, the politics of lowered expectations and inequitable resource distribution, politics that allow us to perpetuate inequity. You know, the greatest predictor of how well a student will do in school is family income. And if you know family income with how much education the parents had, particularly the mother, because the mother is typically the first teacher, you can predict with great consistency how well a child will do on the SAT, what kind of college they'll go to. Now let me ask this, how many of you come from a family where neither parent graduated from college? Raise your hand. Look around the room, over half the people. How many come from a family where neither parent graduated from high school? Still some hands, mine too. Neither of my parents graduated from high school. They sent all 6 of us to college. Harvard, Brown, Cornell, 2 at Berkeley. All right. Those of us who raise our hands are living proof your background should not determine what you can accomplish in education. Okay. Now ask yourself this, when you look at your honors classes, your gifted classes, your advanced placement classes, how often do you see poor kids, black kids, Latino kids, homeless kids, foster care kids, undocumented kids? How often do we see those kids? If the answer is not very often, then the problem lies in our schools, not in the kids. The parents are sending us their best kids, aren't they? We have to be in the talent development work. We're building on the strengths of kids, right? Not the measuring and sorting work. Remember when we were in school, grew up in Brooklyn. We grew up in the part of Brooklyn that still hasn't gentrified, an area called Brownsville, better known for producing boxers like Mike Tyson. My father moved us out of Brownsville, took us to Long Island, thinking that we would do better there, except that this was a district that equated a Spanish surname with an inability to speak English. So they put my brother and I, they didn't have ESL classes, so they put us in special ed classes. You know, throughout the country, there's an overrepresentation of non-English speakers in special ed because we often equate not speaking English with a form of disability. So I was only in first grade, so I didn't mind, but my older brother knew right away something was wrong. So he went to my father. He said, Papi, we're in the wrong class. My father, being an immigrant, and one of the things we know about immigrant parents, they are much more likely to defer to you as professionals. So that's what my father did. He said, you behave yourself and do as you're told. So the next day, my brother comes back with a paper airplane. He said, what's that? He said, that's all we did today is I made paper airplanes. We're not doing anything there. So now my father's thinking maybe something's going on. My father was a police officer in New York, so he decides, I'm going to go visit the school in uniform. Because maybe in uniform, they'll take me seriously. So he goes to visit, and he says, I want to see the class you put my sons in. He said, oh, don't worry, this is a great district. We're doing the best for your children. He said, no, I want to see it. So reluctantly, they take him to see, and they see that this is a holding tank. And one of the things we know is whenever special ed is being talked about as a place, it's usually a problem. Because it's the place where we send the kids we don't know what to do with. Right? So we insist that we get taken out. They said, oh, before we take them out, we have to test them. He said, test them. So they test us, and according to their test now, instead of being special ed, we're gifted. That older brother ends up going to Harvard, I end up going to Brown. What would have happened had my father and mother trusted the schools? Right? Are your schools trustworthy? Do the parents who don't speak English know how to advocate for their children? If they don't, who's the advocate for the child? Who's making sure that child gets what they need and deserve, isn't being channeled off because someone's made a judgment about them? My youngest child, the 5-year-old, can explain global warming. She's got the vocabulary of an 8th grader. When she's out in the park, other parents come to my wife and tell her, you know, your daughter's gifted. And my wife beams, and I have to remind her, you know what her gift is? She has parents with 2 PhDs, one from Harvard, one from Berkeley. What a gift. You know what some of the gifted kids have? They have privileged parents. Privilege is a gift, isn't it? Well, guess what? There are other kids out there who have gifts too, but their gifts are latent. They have to be cultivated. We have to be in the business of developing the talent in our children, all the children, not just those who have parents like my daughter. So what are we doing to make sure that our schools aren't allowing beliefs about race, beliefs about income, beliefs about language to limit our kids? Traditions that don't work for us to get in the way of doing what's right for kids. What are you doing to take on this work? Because again, we can't allow equity to simply become a slogan. Now, we have good research about what does it take for schools to improve. It comes from the University of Chicago. University of Chicago has done this research analyzing schools around the country, and now they said there are 5 essential ingredients. And when those 5 ingredients are in place, schools improve. And not only do they improve, they have sustained improvement. Here's the trick, though. You need all 5. First, a coherent instructional guidance system. Coherent means that teachers are clear about what they're teaching. They're also clear about what skills kids are supposed to learn, and they're accountable for that, and how to intervene when they're not. It means they're working together. That's how you have coherence. Not each teacher doing their own thing. Second, ongoing development of the professional capacity of the staff. Ongoing, because as I said before, the skills of the staff have to match the needs of the kids. The universities do not produce master teachers. I work at UCLA. We have a great teacher ed program. We produce very good novices, not master teachers. Where do master teachers come from? They come from the districts. They come from those who develop and become experts at what they do, because teaching is art and craft. And seniority is no guarantee that you'll be an expert. How do we make sure that the professional development we give to teachers matches what they need? Because not all teachers need the same things. We have an equity lens for the kids. We have an equity lens on the teachers, too. We have to differentiate professional development. Some teachers are strong in content, weak in pedagogy. Some people are really good in pedagogy, weak at relationship building. You need all 3 to be effective, because kids learn through relationships, don't they? How many of you seen kids that will work for one teacher, same child's not working for another teacher? How many of your teachers know that building the relationship is a professional responsibility, not an option if I like the kid? Third, strong parent-community ties. That's what the research says, because parents influence over 50% of student achievement. That's how important it is. All you have to do is look at your data now and ask, how many of our high achievers have no parental support? I bet you there's almost none. Fourth, a student-centered learning climate, a culture where the values, the norms are all geared towards supporting teaching and learning. A culture where the kids believe it's cool to be smart. Every school has a culture. Some cultures are dysfunctional. Some are even toxic. Some are so positive that it brings the best out of everybody there. And every member of the team is working together around a common vision. Fifth, shared leadership. Shared leadership, because this is not just about what principals do, it's about what every member of the team does. And again, if there's a common vision, we get better results. So that's what the research says we should be doing. And one of the things I like to point out to people is, why doesn't policy encourage us to look at these? Because are you shocked by any of those items on the list? I'm not. Anybody's been in education say, yeah, that all pretty much makes sense, doesn't it? So rate your schools. Think about where we stand. Because I would say this, if we were to simply use this as a framework for where we need to place our focus, maybe we need to give our teachers more support focused on student needs. Maybe we need to work on the culture. Maybe we need to work on the parent relationships. What's the work that you should be prioritizing? Sometimes we fixate on the wrong things. You know, one of the things Fullen says, a lot of schools think technology. Let's just get iPads for everybody. iPads are not on the list, is it? Not on the list. Right? Or let's just get whiteboards, or let's just get, small learning communities. We fixate on sometimes the wrong things, and we overlook the things that really matter. And so I want to now elaborate on each of these. And Talk about what does it look like? What does it look like when we have coherent instructional guidance in place? Well, first of all, it shows up in the kids. They're empowered as learners. They're clear about what they've got to do. Class time is work time for the kids. And you see teachers working together, planning together. They're analyzing student work together. Are teachers analyzing student work together in your district? Yes? All right, glad to hear that. Because that's when we can see the effects of our teaching on the kids. I'll come back to that in a moment. Well, this is what it looks like at the classroom level when we bring it all together. This is a 8th grade algebra class in East Los Angeles, Hollenbeck Middle School. All these kids are low income, all these kids are Latino, many of them recent immigrants, some of them undocumented. They're all doing high-level math. Algebra is the gateway to college. That's what we know. Who gets algebra by 8th or 9th grade will determine who's in college, who can complete those A through G requirements. Now, they're lucky because they're in a classroom with a master teacher. She's so good, she can stand in the back and talk to me. If she wants to, she can stop and do yoga. Because she has created an environment in there where the kids are on task and they're learning from each other. They are in control of the learning, which means she can become the facilitator of the learning. She can move amongst those kids and provide differentiated support. We throw out terms like differentiated instruction. If your teachers can't do that, they can't differentiate. If they're doing all the talking, if they're doing what my friend Roland Thorpe called the cemetery method of teaching. You know the cemetery method? Line them up in rows, keep them as still as possible. Deadly, isn't it, when you teach middle school? This teacher's found a way to make math fun, and it's developmentally appropriate for adolescents. How many of you have taught middle school? What's the most important thing when you teach middle school? I learned it quickly. Learning's got to be fun, right? Learning's got to be fun, because if you don't make learning fun, they will find a way to make it fun either way, at your expense, right? Because they're social, they're interested in each other. So because she's got them on task, it means they're not simply learning math. They're learning how to work together. They're learning how to work with people they don't even like, because she doesn't assign it based on friendships. In fact, she deliberately didn't ask that little boy to be with that girl because he has a crush on her. She separated them. So you have to work with other people. You have to learn how to disagree, how to work through conflicts, how to problem solve together. All the social and emotional skills that we now know are correlative of success later in life, they're getting in a math class, because she's created the conditions that allows this to occur. And the kids, when I observed, were so immersed in doing the math that when the bell rang, they were disturbed. They weren't packing up 10 minutes early. Who are your teachers that can teach like this? And who are your teachers that would look at a picture like this and get afraid? Because this is frightening to some people, isn't it? Some people look and say, ooh, or you need a fart, there's a fart in that room, and that room could be out of control, right? Right? This is middle school after all. There are many teachers much more focused on control than on engagement. Well, here's what we know. Engagement is the pathway to achievement. We've been fixated on the wrong things in education. We've been focused on achievement. Achievement is the outcome. We want to see evidence that kids are learning. We want to see evidence that their scores are going up. The question is, how do you get there? When you focus on achievement, you're focused on the end. What are you doing to get your teachers fixated on the work they need to do to get them there? It's like trying to lose weight by getting a good scale. Right? I think if I weigh myself regularly, I will start to lose weight. And you forgot all about the diet and the exercise that goes with it, right? Well, with our teachers, what's the equivalent to focusing on the diet and the exercise? It's getting the kids engaged. Engagement is multidimensional. It is behavioral. Do you have Avid here in Elk Grove? Avid is great at teaching behavioral engagement. Are the kids prepared? Are they on task? Are they organized? Are they clear about what they need to do? But engagement is also cognitive. Do they understand? What don't they understand? What are the gaps? Do they know what they don't know? And engagement is emotional. Do they care? Are they invested as learners? Will they revise the work if you tell them it's not good enough, because they're aiming to do the best. If you're ready for it in Elk Grove, tell the teachers, start focusing on engagement. If we do that, achievement will work itself out. Get the kids excited about learning. Get the kids motivated. That's what was happening, because you know what happens in a classroom like this? This is the highest form of classroom management, too. Classroom management is not about behavior control, it's about academic engagement. When the kids are on task, when they're learning, when they're working, guess what? No disruption. No disruption. Who are your teachers that can do this? Do you give the teachers who can't a chance to see it? These are teachers who understand the learning pyramid. We learn the least through lecture. That's what the research shows. Now, the fact that universities still rely on this should not be a reason that we have to imitate it, right? Because sadly, universities also believe you need no training to be a professor, right? All you need is a PhD. And we don't train professors on how to teach. We don't train them on how to do a syllabus. It's remarkable. Anybody who knows education, it's remarkable what we do at the university level for professors. And it shows. In K-12, we got to be better. Because we know that a lot of our kids are fidgety. A lot of our kids are relational learners. They will work for people they like. They will not work for people they don't like. A lot of our kids need to see it and understand how it's applied before they get it. A lot of our kids don't learn by listening, they learn by doing. How does a child learn to play a video game? They get a lecture on it first? No, they get on the game. And if they're having trouble, they can actually call a friend and ask questions. We call that cheating in school. Right? And when they're playing that game, they make mistakes. They die. But they get to come back. Because you learn through your mistakes. Our classrooms places where it's safe to make mistakes, where they're actually encouraged. And when a child is learning to play a video game, ultimately they learn through mastery. They get better and better, so they rise to a higher level. Do our kids really experience mastery in learning? What's their foundation like when they move from 4th grade to 5th grade, from elementary to middle to high? Do they have the foundation? Because if they don't, they're not going to be successful, will they? The best schools don't expect the kids to learn the way we teach. The best schools teach kids the way they learn. How do your kids learn? What would engage them? What would motivate them? I was visiting a high school in the Bronx, one of the coldest days of the year in January. It's -10 outside. 9 in the morning, I see kids bundling up to go outside. I said, where are you guys going? They said, we're going outside to collect samples from the Bronx River. Now, if you've ever gone to New York, no one goes near the Bronx River. Okay? It's contaminated. So I'm wondering, why are you guys, first of all, it's freezing, and second of all, it's a dirty river. Why are you doing this? And they explained they're monitoring what kinds of pollutants are in the river, what plant life, animal life is in the river. They explained to me the river's making a comeback. Beavers have been spotted in the Bronx River. And although it was freezing outside, they were excited to go. So I asked the teacher, why are you doing this in a high school chemistry class? She said, because it's not good enough for them to learn about chemistry in a book. I want them to see how it's applied in the real world, because I want my kids to become scientists. Maybe a scientist over there. She wasn't fixated on their test scores. No, she had bigger goals, higher aims, which is why she wanted to get them deeply engaged. So what we need is teachers who are focused on learning. Teachers who teach like coaches. How many coaches are in the room? Okay, got some coaches. How does a coach teach? What do you coach, Superintendent? Football. If kids can't block, what do? Do you flunk them at blocking? Teach them how to block. Maybe watch some films. Go over and over again, right? Because the coach is invested in the performance. Right? And that's true whether we're teaching sports or music or theater. And it's got to be the same approach in math, in science, in English. How do we know we're effective? It's got to show up in the kids. We need actual evidence that what we do each day is resulting in kids learning. That's what I call evidence-based teaching. The opposite of evidence-based teaching is what I call faith-based teaching. Right? I hope they got it this year. I just hope. Let's say a prayer. and hope the test scores turned out okay. Well, what does evidence-based teaching look like? It starts by making the standards and expectations clear. It starts by modeling and exposing kids to high-quality work. There are a lot of kids who have never produced high-quality work. I show my grad students what an excellent paper looks like. I say, I'll keep them in the library so you can see, because a lot of them never done a literature review, never collected data on their own. I said, that's what it looks like. Now, yours got to look different, right? But they need to see a model. Right? You're constantly checking for understanding. Right? How do you know at the end of a lesson that what you taught got through? Some teachers have to be brave enough to ask, did this make any sense to you? Right? How many of you have had a teacher that got you to be good at something that you previously were no good at? Anybody have a teacher like that? What was it for you? Yes? History. What did the teacher do?
She brought it alive, made it relevant, made it humorous. She was so obsessed with this.
And it got you hooked. Yep. Turned around. Excellent. Yeah. Hopefully most of us had a teacher like that. It gets you to overcome your fear. In 8th grade, I was struggling in algebra. I was nervous about it because you know what happens when you're not doing well, you start to become more insecure, you don't want to do it anymore. But in 8th grade, I had Miss Harris. She believed in no child left behind. That meant nobody in her class was going to come out not knowing math. She said, I'm a good teacher. You're lucky. That means if you struggle, you sit up front. Right? And she's constantly checking. Are you with me? Are you with me? Let me see the work. Let me show me that you can do this. Miss Harris wore a lot of perfume. If you weren't getting it, you would end up smelling like Miss Harris by the end of the class, so you definitely wanted to be attentive. Right? She had her own approach. That's the thing about teaching. It's art, and the art of teaching means that what works in one class doesn't have to be done the same way in another classroom. Right? You can do it differently. But we want the evidence. Here's one of the things you could do right now in Elk Grove. Tell every student that when we are given an assignment, that's the first draft. Because we don't do our best work on the first draft. The real learning is in the revision. Sometimes we have to revise multiple times, don't we, to get it right. And the real teaching is in the feedback. Helping the student to know, how do I get that work from a C to a B to an A? What do I need to do? Right? Not in the grading. Right? When you see teachers have kids failing and they act like they had nothing to do with it, anybody know anybody like that? They got kids failing in class. I wish these kids would learn the material. As if it's nothing to do with them. And so what we want is teachers who are focused on the learning, on the evidence, who are able to teach differently when kids don't get it. Because talking louder is not an intervention. Right? Right? And who are not afraid of soliciting feedback. So what are you doing to motivate and engage kids at your school? What are you doing to support effective teaching? How many of you have learning walks going on in your schools? Instructional rounds. Only one person is raising their hand. Oh, there's two. Okay. Why is that important? You know where instructional rounds came from? It came from the medical field. Right? It's a training opportunity done in hospitals where the lead physician, usually on Mondays, does the rounds with bunch of interns and newer doctors, and they go and see patients together, and the lead physician's taking the way, and the other doctors are taking notes, and the lead doctor's showing them, I'm not just looking at the charts, I'm actually talking to the person. I'm asking, how did you sleep last night? When's the last time you pooped, right? I want to know that, because that's all giving me information about your health, your well-being, right? When we do instructional rounds with teachers, we make good teaching transparent. Right? Some of our teachers have never seen good teaching. They wouldn't know it. I had a teacher who was struggling teaching math. I brought in a coach to work with her. She showed how you could teach kids probability using dice. All the kids were engaged. They all wanted to play dice. The teacher was there with the dice too. She was, yeah, I'm ready. We said, no. You need to be the observer, right? And then we need to debrief. Because the real learning occurs in debrief. Because so much of what that teacher's done to get those kids engaged, sometimes a novice teacher or a teacher who doesn't get it will miss. They don't see how the classroom's been organized. They don't see how the teacher makes sure that every child is known, every child, despite the size of the room, can be seen. What are you doing to make good teaching transparent? Especially across differences of race and language and culture. Because again, as your demographics change, your teachers have to be able to teach all kinds of kids, don't they? You can't say, the teachers say, you know, I'm only good with kids who are just like me. Right? No, we want to be good with all kinds of kids. And guess what? The kids can tell, can't they, if you don't like them? The kids can tell if you are afraid of them. The kids can tell if you have favorites. The kids can tell if you wore the same shirt 2 days in a row. They can tell because they're watching you closely. You know, one teacher said, my kids knew before my husband that I got my hair done. Because they're watching you. That's how closely they watch you. So we always have to ask our teachers, what are you modeling for the kids? Right? To be a teacher is to be a role model. So here's another district that did this work. They wanted to make sure that the skills of the staff match the needs of the kids. Brockton High School. Brockton High School is the largest high school in the state of Massachusetts with over 4,200 kids. And it's one of 2 urban high schools with a level 1 rating. Massachusetts is the top performing state in the country. Brockton, a poor, working class, economically depressed community, has one of the top high schools in the state. But it wasn't always like that. In 1998, as they were preparing for the state exams, the projection was that 75% of the kids at Brockton High would fail. Brockton High was identified as one of the worst schools in the state. It was called a cesspool in the Boston Globe because of scandals and fights. They're known for fighting. Rocky Marciano came from Brockton. Marvin Hagler, the middleweight champ, came from Brockton. They fight all the time in Brockton. Now they're known for writing in Brockton. They still fight, but they write too. Because after that they were maligned that way, a group of veteran teachers went to the principal and said, you know what? The only way our kids will be ready for this exam is if every teacher in this school becomes a teacher of literacy. The principal said, good idea, but I can't make the teachers do that. He said, we don't have to make them. We'll work with those who are willing, and we'll build from there. He said, well, I can't pay you. He said, you have to pay us. We'll do this on our own time because we think this is the only way to do this. So they started training their colleagues, focus on literacy across the curriculum. By 2002, 50% of the kids were passing the test. So they said, it works, let's stick with it. By 2006, 80% of the kids. Since 2010, over 90% of the kids in Brockton pass the state exam. Over 1/3 gets the highest possible score. Those are the scholarship winners in the picture. And here's the beauty of it. The demographics of the kids who pass match the demographics of the school. What's the strategy in Brockton? Shared leadership. Wasn't just about the principal. She was important. Sue Satchwich, she's a great educator. But Sue retired 3 years ago. She called me and said, Pedro, I'm leaving. Going to St. Petersburg. She's probably evacuating right now. Yeah. I said, are you worried about your school? She said, not at all, because the teachers own this work, not me. And since she's left, the school's made more progress. Because it wasn't just about her. It was about building the capacity of the staff. They got buy-in, and buy-in took time. It took time to get math teachers to get on board with literacy. It took time to get the phys ed teachers that I don't do literacy. Now they all do literacy. Buy-in is key. But buy-in takes work. True buy-in, true shared commitment. They had a coherent strategy focused on student needs. What they didn't do was blame the middle school. They could have, right? They could have said, you know, the problem here is the middle school sucks. Fix the middle school and the high school will be better. Right? You ever hear that one? They said, no, we're going to meet the kids where they are. Because if you can't read and write at grade level, you can't do math in high school. You can't do science in high school because it's all literacy-based. They differentiated professional development for teachers based on the subject, based on the need. And they looked at the data. They looked at the evidence. They followed through. They asked different questions. Key questions like, what are we teaching? How are we teaching it? How do we know students are actually learning it? What's the evidence? What do our students need to know to be able to be successful on the state exam, in their classes, and in their lives beyond school? Key question. They said, given that we're not going to get any additional resources. How many times have you heard people say, well, if our class size was lower, then you would see. Right? No, they said, we're not getting any more help. What can we do with what we have? Right? And then lastly, what do we control? What don't we control? They clearly distinguish between the symptoms of the problem to focus on the causes. Right? You know what's interesting about this is that while Brockton was focused on literacy across the curriculum, Boston, Springfield, Holyoke, the other urban centers that are still struggling will focus on test prep. All the test prep in the world will not develop your literacy skills, much less your math skills. So now Brockton is an outlier, like Worcester Tech. Others are still stuck. Here's a quote from Einstein: "If I had only 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution." Why? Why would Einstein say that? Well, think about this. How many times have we implemented reforms and no one is clear? What's the problem we're trying to fix here? And guess what? We've reformed the reading curriculum, we've reformed the math curriculum, we brought new technology, and guess what? Kids are still not achieving. Oh, maybe we didn't define the problem correctly. Maybe we were too quick to go to a solution without really being clear on what the problem was that we needed to fix here. The more we know about the nature of the problems we're trying to address, more likely we are to enact solutions that will work. Here's what the Boston Globe said about Brockton High 11 years later. It says, "Brockton High School has every excuse for failure, serving a city plagued by crime, poverty, housing foreclosures, and homelessness. But Brockton High, by far the state's largest public high school with 4,200 students, has found success in recent years that has eluded many of the state's urban schools. MCAS scores are soaring, earning the school state recognition as a symbol of urban hope." They didn't change the community. They changed the school. And now for almost 20 years, Brockton is on this path of excellence through equity. And so if you can do it in Brockton, I will tell you, you can do that anywhere in Elk Grove. Because the challenges are not unlike what you face. What's different is the work they're doing, the capacity building work they're doing with the staff, the willingness to ask tough questions about the patterns they see in the data and holding each other accountable for addressing those issues. And their willingness to use interventions, in this case literacy, which is a high leverage intervention. Because when you get everybody on the staff working on a common strategy, you can move an entire school. And that's what they've done at Brockton. So these examples matter because they show us that you can, in fact, work around these obstacles, these that are related to poverty and the challenges in our community, homelessness, housing foreclosures. How many of you, have people experienced housing foreclosures here in this region? Sure. 2008, the recession was devastating for lots of folks. And that has an impact. So the third is parent-community ties. And we know that schools that have strong partnerships with parents do better than schools that don't. Well, here's an example of a school in Brooklyn, New York, PS 28. We have very fancy names for our schools in New York City. Public School number 28. And Sadie Silva, who's featured in that article in the Daily News, beaming because her school had the highest gains in literacy and math, and what you should know is 30% of her students are homeless. So she contacted me and said, "Pedro, I want you to come visit." And I was curious because I live not far from there, so I said, I gotta go see what they're doing in Bed-Stuy. And I get there, and the first person she introduces me to is her secretary. She said, "I want you to meet the person who does all the administrative work here." I said, "Well, then what do you do?" She said, "I'm the lead teacher. I've become a principal to escape the classroom." She said, "Come on, let's go visit some classrooms." And we go into classrooms, and in every room we visit, I see 4, and in some cases 5 adults in the room. So I said, "Where are you getting all these teachers from?" She said, "They're not all teachers." So I have a very high special ed population, so our special ed teachers work with our teachers in the classroom. She said, "But the other adults you see are parents. Parents we've trained to work with teachers." She said, "I have over 50 parents a day who work as volunteers in the school. Some of them just make copies. Some of them just escort kids to the bathroom. I see one parent, she's standing very close to a little boy. I said, 'What's she doing?' She said, 'She's there to keep him calm. We're glad she's here.'" She said the school works through partnerships. A partnership with a local hospital that provides health services on site. A partnership with a job training agency. They provide GED classes for parents, job training for parents on site. A partnership with the YMCA, they provide the second shift. When school closes at 3, there's a second shift for after-school programs, music, chess, swimming lessons on Thursday. They have another partnership with a local agency. They provide help with social workers who train teachers on how to respond to the social and emotional needs of children. So I sit down in a workshop. There are 8 teachers, 2 social workers, and the teachers are posing questions about what's going on with the kids. One teacher says, I got a child who's aggressive. What should I do? Another one's got a child with anxiety disorders, a child who's depressed. One teacher says, I have a child with attachment issues. He's attached to my leg and I can't teach. What should I do? And in every case, they're giving very concrete, practical suggestions on how to address these challenges. They say, we'll follow up, we'll observe you. And I asked the principal, why is this a form of professional development for your teachers? She said, because my teachers have to be more skilled than other teachers, because my kids have greater needs. And if I didn't provide this training, they'd be referring too many kids to special ed. She said, come on, let me introduce you to my guidance counselor. Takes me down the hall to meet the guidance counselor. She said, I have to warn you because I got him from the rubber room. All right. Now, New York City is a place they call the rubber room, where they send employees who've been written up for some infraction. And you could be there for years, doing crossword puzzles, getting paid, right, watching movies. It's a big scandal. And I asked, why did you get this man from the rubber room? She said, well, I don't know why he was there in the first place, but he had been my counselor when I was in school. And he literally saved my life, so I knew he was good. So when I heard he was there, I asked if I could have him. And they said, you could have him. So I go there to meet. He's an older man, and he's talking to a little boy, and they're talking very casually, and introduced myself to both, and I asked the little boy, why are you here today? And he says, I'm here to learn how to be good. I said, is it working? He said, I hope so. I hope so, because I'm tired of being sent out of class all the time. And then the counselor explains they have a no suspension policy. He says, we found out a long time ago it didn't make any difference sending them home to watch TV as a form of discipline. Our goal is to teach them to be responsible for their behavior. That's our goal. So I tell the principal, I said, this is very impressive what you're doing here. I need to write to the chancellor. She said, well, before you do, I got to show you that every child in the school has a learning plan. Every child in this school, we are monitoring their progress, because nothing is left to chance. So I do write to the chancellor, and I tell him about my visit, and he's so impressed, he decides to go visit 3 days later. And he writes about it in a memo he sends out to every principal in New York City, 1,800 principals. Except the only thing he mentions is the data system she was using to monitor her students, because New York City just spent $100 million in the data system. So I write back to him, I said, you missed it, Joel, because it's not just the data system that makes a school like that work. It's all the pieces that come together. At PS 28, and this is probably going to be true in many of your schools, what's your strategy? Their strategy was instructional leadership. Principal was clear, I am the lead teacher here. So she's in classrooms all the time. You know what I always know when I visit a school? If the kids all turn around when an outsider comes in, it means they're not accustomed to outsiders coming in. Right? They should be accustomed, because they should know that we care about what's happening in the classroom. Lots of parental support. You know, she could have easily said, well, these parents are poor, these parents have so many problems. Said, no, these parents need to be my allies. Because in schools like this, there's typically lots of transients. Right? The kids you start with in September, they're not there by June. You got a whole other group of kids. Not at this school. Over 90% of the kids who start in September will be there at the end of June. Because when parents know they're getting a good thing, even if they have to take an extra bus or two, they will get up earlier to be at that school. They have strong community partnerships, because the principal knows she can't do it by herself. And here's what she also knows. She can't wait for help. Why can't the principal sit around and wait for help? Because help is not coming, that's why. No one's going to help her. She has to go out and write the grant with the hospital. We need health services here. She has to go and get some services in the school. She's resourceful. She knows what her kids need, and she makes it happen. She's building the capacity of her teachers, and she's providing individualized support to the students. Now, the parent part is what I want to really emphasize here, because, as I said earlier, 50% of student achievement is influenced by what parents do at home. Okay. It's important to recognize, though, the most important form of parental involvement is not whether or not they're showing up at school. It's what they do at home. Do they get the kids to bed on time? to school on time? Do they talk to them about the work? Do they show the interest? All parents, regardless of how much education they've had, can help their kids and are more likely to if we ask them to, respectfully. Respectfully and with empathy. And keep in mind here, empathy is not pity, but empathy is essential to building trust with the parents. Because if the parents feel as though we're judging them, if the parents feel as though we are not doing what's right for their kids, that we don't care about their kids, then we're going to have a problem with those parents, aren't we? One of the things we don't do is train teachers on how to work with parents, especially when they're from a different background. But all the research shows parents matter. Our parents theoretically want the same thing as we want, don't they? Parents want their kids to do well, we want their kids to do well. Do they know that we want that? Not necessarily. Some parents have had bad experiences in school themselves. So every time they come to visit, they have a flashback. They remember what it was like. So how do we work with parents to let them know, you're in luck, because I care about kids. I love your child. Your child is with me. I'm going to look out for your child. And I'm going to let you know as soon as there's a problem. Because if we work together, we can address that problem much more effectively than if we're at odds. Are you ready for your parents? Are you ready to build that kind of relationship so the parents do their part? And so I want to encourage you, because the research shows that when parents are involved, when there's trust with parents, outcomes for kids go up. It shows that when we have a recognition that parents can do a lot to help their kids, we do much better. And so I always say to people, your parents can be your biggest asset or your biggest problem. Make them an asset. Make them a partner. Here's another school in South Africa that I visited in the townships outside of Port Elizabeth. The school was literally in shambles when the principal got there. He didn't know what he's going to do. They'd been vandalized, teachers weren't showing up, kids weren't showing up. So he decided he was sent there. He would start out by throwing a party for the community. He called it a Thanksgiving party. And he had music and food, so people came out, and they said, what are you thanking us for? He said, I'm thanking you for supporting the school. They said, but we haven't supported the school. He said, I know. I'm thanking you in advance for the support you're going to provide. He says, well, they laughed. He said, but they said, the ministry is the problem. They're not giving us the resources. He said, yeah, the ministry is a problem, but we have resources right here. Look at all the land we have. Why don't we have a garden? Now they have a garden, right? And they're growing food to feed the kids. They said, well, the kids are sick. 40% of the kids are orphans at this school. Parents have died of AIDS. So kids are showing up sick. Kids are not coming because they're sick. Sick are spreading disease. He said, well, let's have a clinic on site. He said, but nobody's trained. He said, let's have a clinic anyway, run by parents. Now they have a clinic staffed by parents. I visited the clinic. I said, what do you do when kids are sick? They said, we give them water and tell them lay down. Half the time it works. When it doesn't work, we call in a real nurse. They're not waiting for help. They're not waiting for help. The principal explained to me, this is the leadership council. He said, they run the school. I work for them. I don't work for the ministry. I work for the parents. You know what was important about that? Whenever I go to an affluent school and I ask the educators, who are you accountable to? They say, to the parents we serve. That's what they say. Why? Because their parents let them know, you work for us. And if we're not happy, we're going to do something about it. Right, Superintendent? They will do something about it. What happens in the Title I schools? Who do you work for? Do the parents feel as though they are your partners? Do we feel accountable to the parents? The principal of the school was making a sign. I said, what are you making that sign for? He said, we're having a march tomorrow to go to the Ministry of Education because our teachers haven't been paid for weeks. He said, you're going to march with parents? He said, yeah, I'm going to march with them because if I don't march with them, they might think I am against them. So I want them to know I'm on their side. I'm on their side. So when our schools are responsive to the community responds. Parents respond. I worked with Emerson Elementary School in Berkeley, one of the highest performing schools in the district for many years, although I hear now it's not so much. Laura Monroe was principal for years. I always thought the reason why the school was so good was because of Laura. Everybody was afraid of her. She would come out there, soon she'd just walk out on the playground with a megaphone, and everybody got quiet. parents, kids, teachers, everybody. Then Laura got sick, left, went on extended leave of absence. The school was worried. They said, the district's going to screw us up. They said, don't send a new principal. We can do this without one. Another teacher stepped up. Susan Olson became the principal. School was still the highest performing school in the district. The only school in Berkeley where there is no gap in achievement. Every child has a learning plan. And every parent, when the parent meets with the child, with the teacher, they say, not only they say what the plan is for the child, they say, and here's what you can do at home to support your child. So what are you doing to build a relationship with parents? How are parents presently involved at your schools? Fourth, school culture. I said already, culture matters. Culture is the milieu in which we work. It's about values, beliefs, expectations, relationships. Here's what we know. If you change everything else but don't change the culture, nothing will change. That's how powerful it is. But cultures can't be imposed on schools. Superintendent can't simply say, from now on we will respect each other. Not that easy, especially because you already have a culture. So the question is, what kind of culture do you have? What do you know about the kids you serve? How do they seem? Do they feel safe there? Do they feel the adults have their backs? The vulnerable ones. Think about the undocumented kids you're serving right now after this news about DACA just went out. A lot of them are living like fugitives and their families. What are we doing to send the message, you're with me, you're safe? Because no one can learn in an unsafe environment. Well, here's an example of a school working under very adverse conditions in the Bronx, Eagle Academy. David Banks founded Eagle Academy. He was an attorney. And he got tired of seeing so many young men locked up and dying from violence in the community. He said, I want to create a school where the culture of the school is more powerful than the culture of the streets. That was his mission. And incidentally, his school is located right next to the courthouse. So every morning, you can see men being taken there in chains to be arraigned. Now, the first time I learned about Eagle Academy was on the subway in New York. And if I should warn you, if you ever take the subway in New York, don't take it at 3:30 if you can avoid it, because that's when school lets out. It's usually very loud, crowded. There I was on a loud, crowded subway. I see three young men in ties. I see one offer up his seat to a pregnant woman. So I assume they must be Mormons, because we often have Mormons in the area, so I go to find out and say, no, we're not Mormons. We're from Eagle Academy. We just come from the Museum of Natural History, headed back to the Bronx. I said, where's your teacher? He said, we know how to get to the Bronx ourselves, do it every day. I said, well, who taught you to give up your seat like that? I was impressed by that. They said, well, that's the Eagle way. Now, Lawrence Kohlberg, writing about moral development in children, said the goal of discipline is not to teach kids to avoid punishment. It's to teach kids to do what's right even when we're not looking. And that's what I saw. So I said, I got to learn about the Eagle way. And so I met David Banks, and David invited me to school, and I find out the Eagle way is based on this. Fencing. Fencing in the South Bronx. Anybody fencing here? Any fencers? No fencers. In Elk Grove? Not today. Okay. Well, fencing is a very ritualized sport, right? Comes from Europe. Lots of concentration, lots of high reflex. They move very fast. But it's not just fencing at the school. It's music, it's theater, it's martial arts, it's sports. Every young person at the school is involved in a club. Must be. Because you know what the research shows? Kids who are involved in music and theater and sports do better than kids who are not involved. It's not just because they get a sense of belonging and attachment to the school, it's because they're developing other skills through those activities, like discipline, concentration, teamwork. And for Eagle Academy, they believe that, guess what, kids who are fencing till 6 o'clock, they don't have time for the game. They're going to be too busy. They'll be too tired. I got to see their robotics team in action. When I was asked to be a judge do you have robotics in Elk Grove? Okay. I was asked to be a judge. I know nothing about robots, but I was there judging. I found out the kids from Eagle Academy came in 6th place out of 88 teams. So I go to tell them the news. They're celebrating. I said, well, only the top 3 teams go to the Georgia Dome. They said, well, we think 6 is good. I said, I agree. I said, explain to me how you built the robot. So one kid brings out his notes, starts explaining the physics behind the robot. I'm really impressed because I don't understand the physics. And I said, well, who helped you build the robot? They said, the custodian helped us. I said, the custodian helped you build a robot? I said, yeah, he got us the parts. We didn't know where he gets the parts from, but whenever we need parts, custodian comes through. I said, who else helped you? They said, our science teacher. They point to a man who's sleeping in a chair. I said, wow, he looks out of it. Then he wakes up. He said, that's because I was up till 3 in the morning with these kids. I said, you guys were up till 3 in the morning? He said, these kids have been working evenings and weekends for the last 3 months on this robot. I said, you guys work evenings and weekends? They said. I said, you get paid? He said, nobody gets paid, including me. But I have the keys, so I got to let them in. So I said, well, you came in 6th place. What do you want to do next? And everyone said the same thing. They said they want to be mechanical engineers. Now, what's important about that is these are kids who come from neighborhoods where there are no mechanical engineers. But they participated in an activity that shifted their sense of what was possible, shifted their whole identity. They're not thinking about gangs. They're thinking about engineering. They're thinking about robots. They're thinking about MIT. They're on a different pathway. What are your kids thinking about? What are the kids that you're losing now to gangs or to work? Because one of the big reasons why we lose kids from school is to go work. How are we showing them they can use education to not only help themselves, but to help their families? At Eagle Academy, they make learning fun, so movement is built in. Music's a part of the curriculum. Because they know that kids who can play violin and play music are kids who are going to believe they can do anything. They are intentionally disrupting the stereotypes that would otherwise undermine the children. And so when you see a culture like this, what you see is that the values and the beliefs of the school are all aligned with their goals. You see that there's a healthy culture of collaboration amongst the staff, and it shows up amongst the kids. It shows up in how they do discipline. It shows up in the teachers, because the teachers have moral authority. Moral authority is not about your title or position, it's about your relationship. Right? And when there are adults with moral authority in school, kids know I'm safe with this person. Kids know this is a person I can really look up to, I can really follow for guidance. Moral authority makes a huge difference for kids who don't have strong parental support at home. So we want to create schools like that. And we need to acknowledge that if we're going to create safe and orderly schools, and I said already how essential that is, that safety is a byproduct of relationships. Too many schools, we have reactive forms of discipline, and what we really need are preventative forms. How are your schools doing restorative practices now? Yes? Okay, but one of the things we know about restorative practices is not a technique, it's a culture change. If the culture doesn't change, there's nothing to restore the kids to. Right? It means the adults, the teachers have to understand, why are we doing this? What this is about? Why are we not just punishing the kids and sending them out, but instead really focusing on restoring these relationships? Because if the adults don't get it, it's not going to work. And I see lots of schools now that think restorative practices is a waste of time. Said, let's bring back the suspensions. Right? Because they didn't understand in the first place what they were supposed to be doing. So we need to make sure that we're clear on how to focus on building character. Here's one thing I often tell schools. Values are more important than rules. Right? I go to a lot of schools where they have a long list of rules of all the things you can't do. Then I'll ask, what are the values you're teaching here? And how do you teach them? Right? Values like respect, kindness, empathy, integrity, honesty. Do we teach those things? Do we model those things? At Eagle Academy, they have an induction ceremony. They start the year because school cultures are rooted in common rituals and practices. Their induction ceremony is one of the rituals. The induction ceremony for 9th graders is run by the 12th graders. They let them know, this is what we expect of you at the school. This is what goes on here. This is what's available. This is how you wear a tie. And they show them, this is how you wear a belt. And they expect them to wear one. They say that, kids who elevate their minds will also elevate their pants. Right? At the end of the induction ceremony I went to, they brought in the 9 members of the Tuskegee Airmen came in. Some of these men were in walkers, right, barely able to come down. And the students heard their stories of service to this country. Why bring in the Tuskegee Airmen? Because their goal is to inspire the kids, to let them know what's possible, to let them know what's expected. And so that's what school cultures do. School cultures also teach and understand the difference between grit and agency. Now, I know that a lot of people, grit's gotten a lot of attention, which I think is kind of odd. Why are we so impressed to know that working hard is a good thing? It's not a brand new idea, is it? One of the things I do know is that some of the people who work hardest are still broke, right? Because hard work without opportunity leaves you broke and tired, right? That's why I say kids don't just need grit, they need agency. Agency starts with critical thinking. Starts with being able to read and understand the nature of the obstacles that you're faced with. Agency is not simply about what you can do, but your ability to get help from others. It's about social capital. Do you have adults who will hire you, who will write letters of recommendation for you, who will help you when you're in trouble? Right? That's what middle-class kids have. Right? And agency can be collective. It's not just about what the individual does, about what teachers do, what parents do, what we do together, what we accomplish together. Our schools need agency. We need to be empowered. That's what I'm seeing. When I visit schools where I see change happening, school like Culver City High School. I live in Culver City in Los Angeles. It's this little enclave with mostly studios. Highest percentage of kids of color taking and passing advanced placement courses in the state at the high school. And I go and I visit, and I now send people, my students there to study and understand what they're doing, and all of it is about the culture of the school, the strong sense of community that's there. It's a school where the kids buy into the education and where the teachers work together and see that they're part of a larger mission. So the fifth principle is about shared leadership. And as I said before, it's got to be shared because you can't expect that a principal or an administrator will do all this by themselves. We need every member of the staff, including the aides, including the custodian, including the receptionist, every member of the team working together around a common sense of mission. That's what they have in Abington, Pennsylvania. Abington is a small community outside of Philadelphia. It's one of the few communities in the country that for the last several years has been closing the gap. The superintendent, Amy Sickle, who's been there now for almost 20 years, Superintendent of the Year several times for the state and for the country. She was a counselor first. And she understands the value of mentorship. So Abington is known as a place that produces new superintendents, because everybody who's worked under is now seen as a leader who can replicate that kind of success elsewhere. The key to the strategy in Abington is expanding access and support to rigorous courses. All kids. They don't have gatekeepers that are keeping them out. They have people actively encouraging kids to be challenged and to be pushed. They got kids, all kids in clubs and participating in sports and music. This strategy is about collaborative problem solving and about developing leadership. And it's about an equity vision that doesn't think that if we do more for some kids, it's going to come at the expense of other kids. It's about serving everyone well. And so despite their focus on equity, the affluent parents who are dominant and who are on the school board are completely in support. They're completely in the support because they don't think that that means that their kids aren't going to be served. And the data shows that's true, because every category of kid has been making gains in achievement over the last several years. So it's not just rhetoric, it shows up in the data. All kids being served well. And I say this because in a lot of places I go to, there's a fear. There's a fear that if we promote equity, the message is going to be to the affluent parents that this is going to hurt your kids. Right? And if that's what happens, equity's dead, because the powerful parents won't support it. They won't even let it happen. Right? And so we need to make sure that the vision is about excellence through equity. Excellence is what we're after, not mediocrity. They do more of what works, which sounds so obvious, and they don't do the things that don't work, like assigning ineffective teachers to high-need kids. Right? And then, finally, they strike the right balance between the technical and the adaptive work. You know, so much of the work in education is of a technical nature, especially for administrators. It's about being in compliance with various regulations and rules at the federal, state, local level. But where we make a difference in leadership is through the adaptive work. Right? When we build the relationships with our colleagues, when we engage the kids, all of that is adaptive work. Instructional leadership is adaptive work. It can't be done from your office. It can only be done in a classroom. Right? When people are not clear about the difference between the technical and the adaptive, I like to say, well, think about a relationship. If you've ever been in a relationship, I'm sure you didn't approach that person and say, I would like to pay bills with you for the rest of your life. Though anybody's been in one knows that's an important part of the relationship. But if that's all the relationship is, what happens? It usually falls apart, doesn't it? Because simply paying bills together is not good enough if you don't like each other, you don't spend time together, there's no love. And schools can never be reduced to just people doing their job descriptions, being technically compliant, but not inspired by a higher vision of what's possible. That's the adaptive part of this work. And so I want to encourage you to think about what you're doing to develop that kind of shared leadership. And in our book, Excellence Through Equity, we talk about 5 principles of leadership. The courage to act, right? Sometimes in education, we just talk about things and we act as though talking about it was the same as doing something about it. We'll create a committee or a task force. What did the committee do? What changed? The courage to look at your core values. Why are we doing this? Right? Most people don't go into education for the money. If you do, then you're probably bitter by now, right? Because you're never going to be rich. You go into education to make a difference. How do we know we're making a difference? How do we know? Organizational meaning. Do we understand how what happens in 9th grade relates to what happens in 12th grade? How what's happening in math relates to what's happening in science and phys ed? Can we see the big picture? Can we understand that we are in team? Because great schools are greater than the sum of their parts. We accomplish more because we work together than if we were all doing our own thing. Constancy of purpose. Because we know that being an educator means it's drudge work, that a lot of times, that calendar can be cruel, right? Especially in March, when there are no more holidays and we've got a lot of time left, right? How do we make sure that even throughout the year, even in March, we stay inspired? We're still doing the work. That's why schools and professional learning communities are so important, because that's where we support each other in doing this work, because relationships make it all possible and sustainable. So I've talked too long already. I know that a lot of what I'm trying to do is difficult to take in even an hour and a half, because it requires a shift in the thinking about the work, a shift in the paradigm. Most of us were educated under a different paradigm, myself included. It led us to believe that intelligence was innate. It's in the genes. Some have it, some don't, right? And if you believe that some have it, some don't, then you think our job is to measure and sort, right? And we used to do that very early, don't we, in school? Starting in kindergarten. And then we have inequitable resources, and we start to believe that we can use discipline to just weed out the bad kids, right? Well, the different paradigm, the new paradigm that allows us to pursue excellence through equity, starts by seeing that intelligence and ability are influenced by opportunity. And our job is to make sure that every child has the opportunity to learn. Our job is to cultivate the talent and the strengths in all children, because when children become more confident and more competent, they become more resilient. Our job is to not just to teach the rules, but to teach the values, to build character. Our job is to build partnerships with parents. Our job is to use discipline to reinforce core values. So what's the work look like here? What's the conversation like in the teacher's lounge in your schools? What do we really believe is possible in Elk Grove for the kids? Let me close with one last story of PS 138 in the South Bronx. That's another fancy name. And this part of the South Bronx is the neighborhood that my grandmother lived in for over 20 years in the Willis Avenue housing projects. And so when I heard there was a high-performing school there, I said, I got to see this, because that neighborhood is just known for all kinds of violence and crime, and it's been described as a war zone, burned in the 1970s when landlords were burning the property to collect insurance. But the projects right there where my grandmother lived are still there. That's where the kids from 138 go. So when I heard their school was high performing, I said, I got to see this. So I arranged a visit. And I'm greeted by a little girl. She's about third grader. And she says, I'm your tour guide. I said, okay, let's go. And the first thing she wants to show me is the evidence. So she takes me to the wall with all the awards the school's won from the state, recognition, blue ribbon school. It's gotten articles written up on it. She wants to see, we're good. Right? Then she takes me to the classrooms and shows me what's going on, and I see the student work on the walls. There's artwork, there's plants in the hallway. I said, plants? She said, yes, we like to keep the school beautiful. I said, well, this is very impressive. She shows me the poetry the kids produce weekly and makes me buy several copies. I said, well, I'm very impressed with this school. She says, well, you didn't see anything yet because I'm going to take you upstairs now. And I go upstairs and I learn the only museum in New York City that's dedicated to the history of the Bronx is in their school. But it's not locked away in a classroom. It's in the hallways. And so the first thing you see is a picture of the Bronx family. Spelled their name with a K, not an X. A German family that owned a large farm. Then you see a picture of Joe Louis when he fought Max Schmeling, 1929 at Yankee Stadium. Picture of the Yankees from the 1920s with Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth who were on the same team. I'm a Yankee fan. I was impressed. See the first album by Donald Byrd in glass, the jazz artist, and his student Willie Colon in glass. And there's all kinds of memorabilia all on display. And the first thing that comes to my mind is that this could easily be vandalized, it could be broken or taken. So I turn to the little girl and I ask, aren't they worried about leaving this out like this, that the kids will break it or take it? And the little girl looks at me like I'm some kind of sicko. And she says, I don't know about the schools you go to normally, but at this school, kids take care of things. Why do I ask the question? Because I am accustomed to going to schools where kids aren't trusted. Schools there where I wouldn't want to put my own child because the environment is not like what I saw at 138. Schools like a school I visited in LA, where I'm visiting a science classroom with no science equipment. And I asked the science teacher, why no science equipment? She said, I have science equipment, but I lock it up. I said, you lock it up? She said, I lock it up so they don't break it. And I said, well, do they ever get to use it? She said, occasionally, when they're good, I'll bring it out. And I could tell by the way she said it, that probably didn't happen very often. And she reminded me of a person. You ever go to someone's house and they got their furniture covered? Like they're waiting for a special guest to come? And you know if you come and it's covered, you're not that guest, right? You're not going to see what's underneath, right? Well, the kids at PS 138 are treated like special guests, and they respond like they are every day. Our kids rise to the level of our expectations. That's what this is. What do you expect of your kids? Could you bring a museum into your schools? I believe Elk Grove can be an example for the entire state if the educators believe that you are serving the kids that could be the leaders for not only this state, but for this country and the world. I wish you all the best in doing that work. Thank you. Before I do it, I wanted to check in to see if there were questions from this morning that you'd like to start with.
One of the things that Elk Grove has started, I guess, a few years ago, but I just went to the training, at the end of last school year, is home visits to families, and not a home visit to talk about your kids doing in class, or I want you to do this, but just want to get to know the family a little bit better. Have other places that you have gone to had that or done that or something?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's sporadic. Some people do it. I was asked to be a judge for Principal of the Year in New York City, and several of the people who were nominated had done that with their staff. They'd gone out into the community, visiting homes, again, get to know us, because it's about building trust, right? You can't have more difficult conversations with someone who's never even seen you before if the first conversation is how bad your child is, right? So I would encourage that, but I think the preparation is important. You have to prepare the teachers for going out, because if they're going to be going into homes, they need to be aware, this is not about judging people and the way they keep their home. This is, the people are doing the best they can. We're about trying to build a connection.
Yeah, they had, I think, a training for us that do it. And
That's
it's all
good.
volunteer.
And was the training helpful?
Yes, but I've been a social worker before.
Okay, so you had some insights into this.
I've done a lot
Yeah.
of it.
Well, good. I would encourage, I hope that continues. It can be real helpful. Yes.
Our school is just going Title I this year, and I've been to the school for 3 years, and one of the things that we keep are deficient on is getting parent involvement. So we're trying things like, after school this, bingo night, and things like this. But when I was listening to you, and you talked about the relationship that you have with the students and how that you can involve the parents. So is the school's culture and the way it responds to the parents or gets involved in the community, does that come from the teacher first and kind of work its way out? Or is it something the school kind of, projects and then we all kind of try to deal with that way?
So you need both. You need both a kind of site level strategy, but it has to be operative at the classroom level. Think about it as you put your parent hat on. When you come to the school, who do you want to talk to? You want to talk to the teachers of your kids,
Right, exactly.
right? So
Right.
you want that direct connection with the person who knows your child the best, but you still need a site level strategy because there are things you can do throughout the year and ways in which to engage parents that it's hard for one teacher to do, but if the site is putting resources, for example, into translation, into a parent liaison who's not simply there to greet parents, but is helping to organize. Those are decisions that can be made by the principal, but it can't be made by the teacher. So I think you need both to make it for a good strategy to work. A lot of teachers get no training on what do I need to say to a parent-teacher conference, right? What's the goal of this parent-teacher conference? How do I make sure that out of this conversation comes clarity around our roles and responsibilities, right? And what do we do to support that child? That should be the purpose. But there's so little thought sometimes or planning that goes into it. So even though we can acknowledge that parents are important, then what are we doing to build it, right? So we do the home visits. That's good. For what purpose, right? Always be clear. What are we trying to get out of this? And how are we going to use this to help us with our goal? Because we're clear our goal is supporting kids, raising achievement. That's where we want to go to. How does this strategy help us in that direction? So, I mentioned Emerson Elementary School in Berkeley. Parents were a critical part of their whole strategy around the school. And they had activities going on throughout the year for parents. The receptionist, I don't know if you're a receptionist or a secretary? Secretary. Well, receptionist, who's the first person to encounter parents? Reception. Does that person know how to talk to parents, right? To make them feel welcome, right? If that person doesn't, you have a weak link right there. You take off work to come see the teacher, and you're left standing at the counter. Now you're really pissed by the time you get to see them, right? And you weren't offered a seat, you weren't offered a glass of water, you weren't offered an explanation of what's going on. So there are little things that make us either ready for parents or not. And I say a lot of schools, because they haven't put the time and thought into it, don't build a partnership. And here's what the research shows. When there's reinforcement at home for what's going on in school, kids do better. It's so clear.
Kind of piggybacking on what he was saying, the school that you were just referencing that really had a lot of parent involvement, were they dealing with various languages? Because I feel like for my site, that's something that really has changed over the years.
So a variety of languages.
Yes.
They were. They may not have the same variety you have or as many as you have. So they had translation. They would primarily deal with Spanish speakers. So they didn't have a lot of other languages. But so it is harder, right?
We have a lot.
Right. But what's interesting, Alex, I was working with a school in Oakland, and suddenly they had a bunch of Eritrean kids. Nobody on site. I said, so I was talking to the principal. She said, what do? We don't know how to reach these kids. I said, I'll bet you that some of their parents were former teachers. She said, really? And now she did. A lot of them were teachers. The parents were teachers back in Eritrea. And she was able to hire one to work as an aide and also be parent liaison with that community. So you do need people who understand the community, and sometimes in that community, there are resources, but we got to know the community, know how to, for example, who are there churches that you could work with that could help you do outreach to that community? So it can't just, parent involvement takes a strategy. It's not simply say, okay, parents, come, right? No, it's more difficult than that. Unless you work with a highly affluent, well-educated, then you have too much parent involvement. They're going to tell you. You know that problem, right? You have to keep them out. But you know, again, it's just a question: is it a priority? If it's a priority, then what's our strategy to make sure it happens? There's so many ways to do it. There's not one way. You know, one thing that I always say to people is, whenever you bring food and when kids are and when kids are presenting, people want to come. People want to see their kids. You know, the kids will make the parents come. Right? So use the kids as a way to bring in the parents. But it starts by recognizing how important it is.